The invitation arrived on a Thursday. Cordelia Vane read it twice, set it on the kitchen table of the cottage she had rented for 11 months, and then read it a third time, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something less absurd. The Duke of Ashmore was hosting his annual autumn gathering at Thornfield Park. Thornfield Park, her family's estate for 230 years, until her uncle's lawyers had finished with the paperwork 3 years ago, and her name had been removed from every document that mattered. She had 14 days. It was not enough time, and also more than she needed. She had been planning this for longer than 14 days. She had been planning it, in one form or another, since she was 22 years old, and standing in her father's study, watching a man she had never met explain, with practiced sympathy, that the entailment had been interpreted differently than anyone had expected, and that Thornfield Park would pass to the male line, and that she, Miss Cordelia Vane, only child of the late Viscount Vane, would receive a modest sum and the contents of the East Wing, which turned out to be mostly furniture and a portrait of an ancestor no one could identify. She was 25 now. The modest sum had paid for 3 years of careful, deliberate rebuilding. The cottage, the contacts, the patience. The invitation had come through a chain of acquaintances too long to explain easily, addressed to a Miss C. Whitbury, which was not her name, but was close enough to her mother's maiden name that she could answer to it without flinching. She folded the invitation and put it in the drawer with her father's cufflinks. 14 days. The problem with Thornfield Park was not that Cordelia missed it, though she did, in the particular way you miss something that was supposed to be yours. Not with sentimentality, but with a low, constant awareness, the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. The problem was that her father's personal correspondence, the letters she believed would prove the entailment had been improperly executed, were still there. In the library, in the locked drawer of the writing desk that had been his and his father's before him, and which she had watched, on the day she left, being carried by 2 men who did not know what it contained. Her solicitor had told her the letters were not sufficient grounds for a legal challenge. Her solicitor had also retired 18 months ago and moved to Bath, so she had acquired a new one. A younger woman named Miss Hargrove, who had read the same letters and said, carefully, that they were not sufficient on their own, but that if there were additional documents, correspondence between her father and the family's original estate lawyers, for instance, the picture might look considerably different. Cordelia knew those documents existed. She had seen them once, when she was 17, in a folder her father had shown her with the seriousness of a man preparing for a possibility he hoped would never materialize. She needed to get into the house. The gathering at Thornfield Park was the only social event the new Duke of Ashmore hosted each year. His household staff had turned over considerably since his acquisition of the estate. She had confirmed this carefully through 2 degrees of separation before allowing herself to hope. There was one underfootman who might have recognized her, but he had taken a position in London in January. She packed 2 dresses, a set of hairpins her mother had left her, and the small notebook in which she had, over 3 years, written everything she remembered about the layout of the house. She did not pack hope. Hope was not the kind of thing you packed. Either you carried it with you already, or you didn't. The village of Ashmore was 40 minutes by carriage from the nearest coaching inn, and the road had not improved since she had last traveled it. Cordelia arrived at the Thornfield Park gate in the early afternoon, having given her name at the inn as Miss Whitbury, and sat in the carriage watching the tree line she had grown up with past the window. The oak at the east corner of the drive had been trimmed. It had always leaned slightly south, and her father had always refused to have it cut back because he said it had earned its lean. Someone had cut it back. She kept her face arranged and got out of the carriage. The footman who met her at the door was young and unfamiliar, and took her name with professional blankness. She was shown to a room in the west wing. Her mother's old morning room had been converted to a guest bedroom, she noted, which was practical, and also made something in her chest contract briefly before she put it away. The room was comfortable. Someone had placed fresh flowers on the dressing table. She stood at the window and looked out at the garden, which was exactly as she remembered it, and allowed herself precisely 90 seconds of something she refused to call grief before she opened her notebook and got to work. The other guests arrived through the afternoon. Cordelia had dressed carefully, not conspicuously, which would draw attention, but not so plainly as to seem like she was trying to disappear, which also drew attention. The pale blue wool was her mother's, altered. The hairpins caught the late light when she moved. She came downstairs at 5:30 and stood at the edge of the drawing room and looked for the first time at the man who had taken her home, the Duke of Ashmore. She had gathered, from careful inquiry, that his name was Everett Norwood, that he was 31, that he had inherited the dukedom unexpectedly following the deaths of 2 older cousins in close succession, and that he was generally considered reserved to the point of being difficult. Was standing near the fireplace talking to a man she didn't recognize. He was taller than she had expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. She had thought about him for 3 years in the abstract, as an obstacle and an occupier, and the actuality of him was somehow more inconvenient than the idea. He was listening more than he was talking, which she noted. He held his glass with the ease of someone who had grown up in rooms like this one, and then corrected herself. He hadn't. He had grown up in Derbyshire, second son of a second son, and had been a barrister before the dukedom had found him. The ease was acquired, not inherited. She found that more interesting than she had expected to. She introduced herself to the nearest cluster of guests as Miss Whitbury from Dorset, which was technically true if you counted the cottage, and spent the next hour being moderately charming and listening carefully to everything anyone said about the household, the staff, and the library. The library. She needed the library. A woman named Mrs. Alderton, no relation to anyone she knew, told her that the Duke had not changed much of the house, which he had apparently inherited with the attitude of a man who had been handed an object of uncertain value and didn't yet know what to do with it. Cordelia found this information useful and also unexpectedly affecting, which she also put away. She did not speak to the Duke that evening. He moved through the room with the efficiency of someone fulfilling an obligation, and she had no particular reason to seek him out before she needed to. She needed first to find out whether the library was locked at night, and whether the writing desk was still where it had been, and whether anyone else was aware of what was in it. She went to bed at 10 o'clock and lay awake until 1, thinking. She found the library unlocked the following morning, at 7, before the household was fully awake. She was not supposed to be there. She was a guest, and guests did not wander the private wings of a house at 7 in the morning. But she had also grown up in this house, and she knew that the library in the East Corridor was not technically part of the private wing, and that the household did not fully rouse until 7:30, and that the window at the end of the East Corridor still latched improperly on the inside, which meant she could return the way she came without passing the main stairs. The desk was still there. She had not let herself fully believe it would be. It was a heavy piece, walnut with the brass fittings her grandfather had installed, and it sat in the same corner as it always had because it was too large to be moved without considerable effort, and because whoever had arranged the library after her departure had apparently decided it was easier to work around it. The drawer was locked. She had brought the key. This was the thing she had not told anyone, not even Miss Hargrove. that the key to her father's desk had been on his keyring when he died, and that the keyring had come to her with his personal effects, and that she had not given it up because she had not been asked to give it up specifically, and that she had kept it for 3 years in the same drawer as his cufflinks for exactly this possibility. The key turned. The folder was there, older than she remembered, the paper more yellowed, but there. She did not take it. She was not a fool, and a missing folder would be noticed. She unfolded each document carefully on the desk surface and wrote down what she needed in her notebook. Every date, every name, every notation in her father's handwriting in the margins. It took 23 minutes. She had practiced this. She knew how long 23 minutes felt. She locked the drawer. She left the library the way she had come. She latched the east corridor window from outside as best she could, which was not perfectly but well enough. She was back in her room before 7:30, sitting at the dressing table with her notebook in her lap, reading what she had written. It was enough. She was almost certain it was enough. She sat with that for a moment, not celebrating, not yet, because she was not the kind of person who celebrated before the work was done. And then she put the notebook in the lining of her traveling case and went down for breakfast. The difficulty she had not anticipated was the Duke, not his presence specifically. She had anticipated his presence. He lived here. The difficulty was the specific quality of his attention, which was considerably more acute than the reserved to the point of difficult assessment had led her to expect. He was seated at the far end of the breakfast table when she came in, reading a letter, and eating methodically, and he looked up when she entered, not in the polite, reflexive way of a host marking a guest's arrival, but in the way of someone who had been thinking about something, and then the something had walked into the room. She took the chair nearest the window and served herself toast, and tried to look like a woman who had slept very well and had no particular feelings about this house or its contents. "Miss Whitbury," he said. "Your Grace, did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you." He looked at her for a moment in a way that was not quite assessment and not quite curiosity, but something adjacent to both. Then he returned to his letter. She buttered her toast. She had been observed. She wasn't sure how much. She ran through the possibilities with the professional detachment she had developed over 3 years of doing things she was not supposed to do in service of getting back what was hers, and concluded that a man who had been a barrister, who had been trained to notice discrepancies and follow threads, was considerably more inconvenient as an obstacle than a man who had simply inherited a title and a house and a habit of not looking too closely at things. She needed to leave today. She had the information she needed. There was no reason to stay. She would make her excuses after breakfast. A family matter, something requiring her return to Dorset, and be in the carriage within the hour. She was 3 bites into her toast when he said, without looking up from the letter, "The east corridor window doesn't latch properly. I've been meaning to have it fixed." She set down her knife. "That must be a nuisance," she said. "In winter, especially." "It is." He folded the letter. "Were you warm enough last night? I can have them adjust the fire in your room if the corridor drafts are reaching you." "I was perfectly comfortable," she said. "Thank you." He looked at her again. "Not long, just long enough." "Good," he said, and poured himself more coffee. She did not leave that morning. She was not sure afterward exactly why not. The rational decision was to go. The information was in her notebook, safe, and her continued presence at Thornfield Park was an exposure she didn't need. She was not the kind of person who took unnecessary risks, and yet she found herself in the garden after breakfast, walking the gravel paths she had walked all her life, and she found him there too, which was not what she had planned. He was standing at the far end of the kitchen garden, looking at the wall where her father had trained an espaliered pear tree for 20 years, which was still there, bare now in the autumn, but still shaped exactly as her father had shaped it. "This was already here when I inherited," he said, when she was close enough that speaking was natural. He was looking at the pear tree, not at her. "I didn't plant it. I haven't changed it. I didn't quite know what to do with it." "It takes a long time," she said, "to train them like that. Years. I know." He was quiet for a moment. The previous owner's daughter. She was never here to collect her father's personal things from the library. Cordelia's hands were very still inside her gloves. "I understand she moved away," she said. "She did." He turned and looked at her, and the quality of it was entirely different from the breakfast table. There was no performance in it. "I had the solicitors make 3 attempts to contact her. She had left a forwarding address that stopped working after the first year. I was never sure if that was intentional. Perhaps she found it easier. Perhaps." He looked back at the pear tree. "There's a writing desk in the library that I haven't moved. Heavy walnut piece. It was locked when I inherited it, and I didn't have a key, and I didn't feel it was my place to force it. Some things aren't yours just because they're in your house." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's an unusual attitude," she said finally. "For a duke. I'm a fairly unusual duke." He glanced at her, and there was something very dry in it, which she had not expected. "I was a barrister in Clerkenwell 18 months ago. I'm still adjusting to the furniture." She looked at the pear tree. Her father had started it the year she was born. He had said, once, when she was very young, that a tree trained to a wall was like an argument well made. It took patience and required that you understand the structure you were working with, not fight it. "The desk has a brass fitting on the lower left drawer," she said. "The key would be quite small. Unusual cut." He said nothing. "If you were ever in contact with Miss Vane again," she continued, "you might mention that the desk is there and undisturbed. She might find that useful to know." She felt him looking at her with the particular attention of someone fitting pieces together, and she kept her eyes on the pear tree, and her hands still inside her gloves, and her breathing even. "I'll keep that in mind," he said quietly. "If I'm ever in contact with her." She stayed 2 more days. She was not sure she could explain this to anyone, including herself. She had the information. She had more than she needed. She wrote to Miss Hargrove that evening from the writing desk in her guest room. The ordinary one, not her father's, and laid out everything she had found, every date and name, with the controlled precision of someone who had been saving this for a long time. She sent the letter by the morning post. It was done, and she stayed 2 more days. The Duke, Everett Norwood, barrister from Clerkenwell, Duke by the improbable arithmetic of other people dying, was not what she had spent 3 years building him into. He had not stolen her home. He had inherited it from a legal process he had not designed and could not have anticipated. And he had arrived to find a house full of someone else's furniture and someone else's trees, and a locked desk he didn't feel entitled to open. She could be angry at the law, which she was, and at her uncle's lawyers, which she deeply was, and at the entailment which she had spent 3 years being furious about in the specific way that has nowhere to go because it is a fury at a document written before you were born by people who did not think about you. She could not, she found, sustain the anger at him. On the 2nd day they walked the perimeter of the south field, which had been her father's favorite walk, and she told him about the drainage problem at the east corner that had never been properly fixed, and he listened the way he had listened at the breakfast table, with more attention than the situation required, and wrote something in the small notebook he carried. "You know a great deal about this estate," he said, at the end of the walk. "I grew up nearby," she said. "It was not a lie, so you said." He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said the thing that was sitting very plainly in the air between them, and then they went inside because it was getting cold. On the morning she left, he came to the entry hall while her bags were being loaded. She had not expected this. Guests departed with goodbyes at breakfast generally, not a personal attendance in the hall by the host. "Miss Whitbury," he said, "Your Grace." He looked at her travel case, the one with the notebook in the lining, and then at her. "The solicitors for the previous owner's estate," he said. "I believe they're still in London. If the daughter were ever to reopen the question of the estate documents, I imagine the new solicitor would want them to know that the contents of the library are intact and available for review, including the writing desk." "That's very considerate," she said. "I'm finding," he said, "that consideration is rather important when you're living in someone else's house." She looked at him for a moment. The barrister from Clerkenwell, the accidental duke, the man who had not moved her father's pear tree, or forced the lock of his desk, or thrown away the furniture of a family he had displaced without meaning to. And she thought that she had spent 3 years building an adversary and was now standing in the entry hall of her childhood home, talking to someone who was quietly handing her the means to take it back. "The daughter," she said. "If you ever do speak to her, she might want to know that she's not angry at the right person." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm not sure she'd find that entirely comforting." "No," she said, "but she might find it useful." She picked up her bag. He offered his hand, which was a somewhat formal gesture for the departure of a guest who had stayed 3 days. And she shook it, and his grip was firm and brief, the handshake of someone who had spent years in courtrooms meaning what he said. She went down the front steps of Thornfield Park and got into the carriage and did not look back, because she was not the kind of person who looked back, and because she knew, with the particular certainty of someone who has spent 3 years planning a single thing and watched it become something considerably larger than the plan, that she would be back. Not as Miss Whitbury, not with a notebook hidden in her lining, not needing to come in through the east corridor window. She would be back with Miss Hargrove and the documents and the dated correspondence of her father's lawyers and the specific, well-made argument that would need to be understood, not fought. And when she came back, the desk would be there, and the key would fit, and the pear tree would still be trained against the south wall, bare in November and full in spring, the way it had been every year of her life. The carriage turned at the oak on the east corner of the drive, the one that had been trimmed back despite everything, and which was already, she could see, beginning to lean again. She smiled, just once, to herself, and let it go.